This is question 5 from section 1 of the 2016 TSA paper. In this question we're asked which of the options is an underlying assumption of the argument. So let's look at the argument. The first two sentences say there's more to interpreting and recognising faces than you might think. Forgetting people we used to know isn't that uncommon. So they're saying recognising faces is difficult, so that we often forget people we once knew. Then they say, the next time you're standing in a supermarket, having a conversation with someone you don't recognise, but act like you do, take heed, the likelihood is they will know you are lying. So if you're pretending to remember someone, then they'll probably know. Next they say, lying is a lot harder than most people realise, and hiding the fact we're lying is even harder. The next couple of sentences say, this is because we all make brief, involuntary facial expressions when we try to conceal or repress something, like trying to remember someone, and these have been called micro-expressions. So it said this is because, it's referring back to 4, so it's saying why lying is difficult, it's saying it's because of micro-expressions. And then lastly they say, so when someone you don't recognise starts talking to you, you should just confess straight away because your micro-expressions will probably give you away anyway. So let's just think about the structure of the argument quickly. They're saying, these two sentences are just setting up the problem that we might forget people we know, so we have to potentially pretend we do know them. And the rest is about why that's difficult. They say, lying is hard because of this, because of micro-expressions. And then this sentence saying, people probably know you're lying, is kind of repeated in 7, where they say your expressions will give you away. So if we're looking for an assumption, we want to know what are being given as reasons and what's being given as the conclusion. 7 starts with this, the last sentence starts with this so, and it contains, it's a should statement, so it's about what we should do. And part of the information we had before is contained in it, in 3. So it looks very much like 7 is the main conclusion. So now let's go and think a little bit more carefully about the flow of the logic leading to this conclusion, that we shouldn't lie because our expressions give us away. And we'll see what kind of assumption the writer might be making. Okay, so we said the structure of the argument is, we have these micro-expressions, and therefore people know we're lying, and therefore we shouldn't lie. That's basically the conclusion. So let's look at the options. I'll zoom in on these in a second so we can read them, and we'll see which of them, if false, would undermine this chain of reasoning, because that's how we find an assumption. So first let's look at A. A says, if someone you don't recognise starts to talk to you, it's not because they've mistaken you for someone else. So could that undermine the argument? Well, I've got 2 implications in this argument. One is from micro-expressions being a thing to people knowing you're lying, people knowing that you're lying, and the other is from people knowing that you're lying to you not, to the fact that you shouldn't lie, or the conclusion that you shouldn't lie. So let's test it against both of these. Suppose it's false that if someone you don't recognise talks to you, they haven't mistaken you for someone else. So that if that's false, it means sometimes when people don't recognise you, they have mistaken you for someone else. Well, it doesn't have any connection, it doesn't have any relationship to micro-expressions or people knowing that we're lying because of micro-expressions. It doesn't talk about why people know we're lying. It talks about other people mistaking us for someone else. And it also doesn't have any connection to whether or not we should lie, because it's about when other people are mistaken. So it looks like A isn't relevant to either of these implications, and so it's not an assumption. Now let's look at B. B says that people are able to recognise in micro-expressions that show someone is lying. Well, now let's think about how this corresponds to the argument. Suppose the opposite. Suppose people couldn't recognise micro-expressions from lying. Well, that would actually break this connection between micro-expressions and people knowing we're lying. So if people didn't always recognise them, then sometimes, even though the microexpressions happen, people still won't know we're lying, and therefore we won't have a reason not to lie. So it looks like this does actually undermine the argument if it's false, so that is an assumption the writer's making. Let's quickly go through the others, just in case one of them is an even better fit than B. So if we look at C quickly, it says, people would prefer to know they've not been recognised rather than have you pretend to know them. So this doesn't have anything to do with the connection between microexpressions and people knowing you're lying, so it's not relevant to that part. And does it give you a reason not to lie? Well, it does, but it's not the reason the writer's using. They're saying you shouldn't lie because people know, so it's suggesting that there's no point lying because people would prefer to know you forgot them. So that's not actually undermining the writer's argument, if it's false. And it's not something the writer's relying on. So let's look at D. D says that someone you're talking to won't be embarrassed that you didn't recognise them. Well, again, that doesn't have anything to do with microexpressions. Does it prevent you having this reason not to lie? Well, suppose D is false. So suppose the person talking to you would be embarrassed you forgot. Well, that might give you a reason to lie, except that the writer's saying that they'll know anyway. So whether or not you lie, they're going to be embarrassed. So you still have reasons not to lie, so for instance, just not to come across as a liar. So D being false doesn't undermine the argument, so that's not an assumption the writer's making. And then if we look at E, saying that people who are talking to someone they know won't lie, well, it's clear it's not going to be relevant because the argument's about when we talk to people we don't recognise, and in particular it doesn't have any connection to microexpressions, and it doesn't break the connection between people knowing we're lying and the idea that we shouldn't lie. So this is also going to be to not be an assumption, and therefore it's clear that the answer is B.